It is also contrary to the Confession of Faith, chapter 20, section 4, asserting that, quote, "For their publishing such opinions or maintaining of such practices as are contrary to the light of nature or to the known principles of Christianity, whether concerning faith, worship, or conversation, or to the power of godliness, or such erroneous opinions or practices, either in their own nature or in the manner of publishing or maintaining them, are destructive to the external peace and order which Christ hath established in the Church, they may lawfully be called to account and proceeded against by the censures of the Church and by the power of the civil magistrate." Unquote. And therefore to accept of this toleration is inconsistent with the principles of the Church of Scotland, with the national and solemn league and covenants, and solemn acknowledgment of sins and engagement to duties, in all which we are bound to extirpate popery, prelacy, etc., with the whole tract of contendings in the fifth period above related, and particularly by the testimony of the Synod of Fife, and other brethren in the ministry, against Cromwell's vast toleration and liberty of conscience mentioned above page. For it is plain, if it be not to be suffered, then it is not to be accepted. Tenthly, considering the terms wherein it is offered, they cannot make such a shameful bargain. In the former proclamation it is granted expressly under several conditions, restrictions, and limitations, whereof indeed some are retracted in the latter, as the restriction of it to moderate Presbyterians, which would seem to be taken off by extending to all without reserve to serve God in their own way, but being evidently exclusive of all that would serve God in Christ's way, and not after the mode prescribed, it is so modified and restricted that all that will accept of it must be moderate Presbyterians indeed, which, as it is taken in the court sense, must be an ignominy to all that have zeal against Antichrist. The limitation also to private houses and not to outhouses is further enlarged to chapels or places purposely hired, but still it is stinted to these, which they must bargain for with council or sheriffs, etc., so that none of these restrictions and limitations are altogether removed, but the condition of taking the oath only. Yet it is very near to an equivalency homologated by the acceptors acknowledging in the grantor a prerogative of absolute power over all laws, which is confirmed and maintained by their acceptance. As for the rest that are not so much as said to be removed, they must be interpreted to remain as the terms, conditions, restrictions, and limitations upon which they are to enjoy the benefit of this toleration. And what he says, that he thought fit by this proclamation further to declare, does confirm it, that there are further explications, but no taking off of former restrictions. Hence it is yet clogged with such provisions and restrictions as must make it very nauseous to all truly tender. Number 1. The restriction as to the persons still remains, that only moderate Presbyterians and such as are willing to accept of this indulgence allenarily, and none other, and such only whose names must be signified to these sheriffs, stewards, bailiffs, etc., are to have the benefit of this indulgence, whereby all the zealous and faithful Presbyterians are excluded, for these they will not call them moderate, and all that would improve it without a formal acceptance, and all who for their former diligence and duty are under the lash of their wicked law, and dare not give up their names to those who are seeking their lives, must be deprived of it. Secondly, it is restricted to certain places still, which must be made known to some one or more of the next privy councillors, whereby they are tied to a dependence on their warrant, and must have their lease and license for preaching the word in any place, and field meetings are severely interdicted. Though signally countenanced of the Lord, whereby the word of the Lord is bound and bounded, and by this acceptance their bloody laws against preaching in the open fields, where people can have freest access with convenience and safety, are justified. Thirdly, the manner of meeting is restricted, which must be in such a way as the peace and security of the government and the practice thereof may not be endangered, and again that their meetings be peaceably held, which is all one upon the matter with the bond of peace and binding to the good behavior so much formerly contended against by professors, and is really the same with the condition of the cautionary bond in the indulgence after Bothwell, of which see page. And further, they must be openly and publicly held, and all persons freely admitted to them, which is for the informing trade, exposing to all the inconveniences of Jesuits and other spies and flies their delations, in case anything be spoken reflecting on the government, a great temptation to ministers. Fourthly, the worst of all is upon their matter of preaching, which is so restricted and limited that nothing must be said or done contrary to the will and peace of his reign, seditious or treasonable, and in case any treasonable speeches be uttered, the law is to take place against the guilty, and none other present, providing they reveal to any of the council the guilt so committed, as in the former proclamation. And in the last it is further declared that nothing must be preached or taught which may any way tend to alienate the hearts of the people from him or his government. Here is the price at which they are to purchase their freedom, a sad bargain to buy liberty and sell truth, which yet hardly can be so exactly paid, but he may find a pretense for retrenching it when he pleases. For if a minister shall pray for the overturning of a throne of iniquity, or for confounding all that serve graven images, and for destruction of the Pope, and all that give their power to that beast, there will be something said against the will of his government. Or if any shall hear this and not delate it, then the same pretense is relevant. Or if he shall preach against the king's religion as idolatry, and the church of Rome as Babylon, and discharge his conscience and duty in speaking against the tyranny of the times. Or let him preach against any public sin faithfully. A popish critic or Romish bigot shall interpret it to be an alienation of the people's hearts from the king and his government. But who can be faithful and preach in season and out of season now? But he must think it his duty to endeavor to alienate the hearts of the people from such an enemy to Christ, and his absolute tyranny, so declaredly stated against God? What watchman must not see it his indispensable duty to warn all people of his devilish designs to destroy the church and nation, and preach so that the people may hate the whore and his pimp of hers? Sure, if he preach the whole counsel of God, he must preach against popery and tyranny. And if he think this indulgence from absolute prerogative, granted and accepted on these terms, can supersede him from this faithfulness, then he is no more the servant of Christ, but a pleaser of men. Therefore, since it is so clogged with so many restrictions, so inconsistent with duty, so contrary to Scripture, so clearly violatory of covenant engagements, so cross to the constant contendings and constitutions of this church and acts of assembly, it were a general defection to accept of it. Number 11. Considering the scandal of it, they dare not so offend the generation of the righteous by the acceptance and dishonor of God, disgrace the Protestant profession, wrong the interest thereof, and betray their native country, as thus to comply with the design of Antichrist, and partake of this cruel tender mercy of the beast, who hath always mischief in his heart, and intends this as a preparative for inducing or informing all that are hereby lulled asleep, either to take on his mark or bear the marks of his fiery fury afterwards. For hereby foreign churches may think we are in a fair way of reconciliation with Antichrist, when we so kindly accept his harbinger's favors. And it cannot but be very stumbling to see the ministers of Scotland, whose testimony used to be terrible to the Popish, and renowned through all the Protestant churches, purchasing a liberty to themselves the rate of burying and betraying the cause into bondage and restraint, and thus to be laid by from all active and open opposition to Antichrist's designs in such a season. The world will be tempted to think they are not governed by principles, but by their own interest in this juncture, seeking their own things more than the things of Christ, and that it was not the late usurpation upon and overturning of religion and liberty that offended them, so much as the persecution they sustained thereby. But if that arbitrary power had been exerted in their favors, though with the same prejudice to the cause of Christ, they would have complied with it as they do now. Alas, sad and dolorous have been the scandals given and taken by and from the declining ministers of Scotland heretofore, which have rent and racked the poor remnant, and offended many both at home and abroad. But none so stumbling as this, and therefore the tender will be shy to meddle with it. Number 12. Considering the addresses made thereupon with such a strain of fulsome and blasphemous flatteries to the dishonor of God, the reproach of the cause, the betraying of the church, and detriment of the nation, and exposing themselves to the contempt of all, the poor persecuted party dare not so much as seem to incorporate with them. I shall set down the first of their addresses given forth in the name of all the Presbyterian ministers, and let the reader judge whether there be not cause of standing aloof from every appearance of being of their number. It is dated at Edinburgh, July 21st, 1687, of this tenor. To the King's most excellent Majesty, the humble address of the Presbyterian ministers of His Majesty's Kingdom of Scotland. Quote, We, your Majesty's most loyal servants, the ministers of the Presbyterian persuasion in your ancient Kingdom of Scotland, from the due sense we have of your Majesty's gracious and surprising favor in not only putting a stop to our long-said sufferings for nonconformity, but granting us the liberty of the public and peaceable exercise of our ministerial function without any hazard, as we bless the great God who hath put this in your royal heart, do withal find ourselves bound in duty to offer our most humble and hearty thanks to your sacred Majesty, the favor bestowed being to us and all the people of our persuasion valuable above all our earthly comforts, especially since we have ground from your Majesty to believe that our loyalty is not to be questioned upon the account of our being Presbyterians, who, as we have amidst all former temptations endeavored, so we are firmly resolved still to preserve an entire loyalty in our doctrine and practice, consonant to our known principles, which, according to the Holy Scriptures, are contained in the Confession of Faith, generally owned by Presbyterians in all your Majesty's dominions, and by the help of God so to demean ourselves as your Majesty may find cause rather to enlarge than to diminish your favors toward us, thoroughly persuading ourselves from your Majesty's justice and goodness, that if we shall at any time be otherwise represented, your Majesty will not give credit to such information until you have due cognition thereof, and humbly beseeching that those who promote any disloyal principles and practices, as we disown them, may be looked upon as none of ours, whatever name they may assume to themselves. May it please your most excellent Majesty graciously to accept of this our most humble address, as proceeding from the plainness and sincerity of our loyal and thankful hearts, much engaged by your royal favor, to continue our fervent prayers to the King of Kings for divine illumination and conduct, with all other blessings, spiritual and temporal, ever to attend your royal person and government, which is the greatest duty can be rendered to your Majesty by your Majesty's most humble, most faithful, and most obedient subjects, subscribed in our names and in the name of the rest of our brethren of our persuasion at their desire, unquote. Which received this gracious return, the King's letter to the Presbyterians in his ancient Kingdom of Scotland. Quote, We love you well, and we heartily thank you for your address. We resolve to protect you and your liberty, religion, and properties all our life, and we shall lay down such methods as shall not be in the power of any to alter hereafter. And in the meantime, we desire you to pray for our person and government, unquote. To which may be added that kind compliment of the Chancellor's, quote, Gentlemen, my master hath commanded me to tell you that I am to serve you in all things within the compass of my power, unquote. These gentlemen needed not to have been solicitous that those who avouched an adherence to the Covenanted Reformation and avow an opposition to an anti-Christian usurpers, which they call promoting disloyal principles and practices, might not be looked upon as their confederacy. For all that abide in the principles and practices of the Church of Scotland, which they have deserted, and that desire to be found loyal to Christ in opposition to his and the Church's and the country's declared enemy, would count it a sin and scandal, laying them obnoxious to the displeasure of the holy and jealous God, who will resent this heinous indignity that they have done unto his Majesty, if they do not address themselves unto him for pardon of the iniquity of this address, which is the desire of those whom they disown, that they may find grace to do so, and a shameful reproach exposing them to the contempt of all of whom they expect sympathy, to be reckoned of their association, who have thus betrayed the cause and the country.